Chris, you're a foundation member of the Australian Society of Archivists. All those years ago, 40 years ago, what made you join, what made you be a part of this new organisation, and what were your hopes and aspirations for it at the time?
Okay, so it wasn't all that much of an individual decision. I was working for the National Archives. The National Archives had a strong culture of not wanting to be librarians, and the professional group was a subset of the Library Association. So people in the National Archives more or less pushed me, people like Keith Penny and Peter Scott, more or less pushed me to represent the National Archives' view in that process. I was personally very interested. I worked closely with Michael Sacria in the preliminary work, which was very important, and Michael still doesn't get enough credit for what he did. He basically organised the ideas to a point where people could vote on them. And I was active in the Canberra part of that process, and then when a drafting committee was appointed, they said they absolutely needed someone semi-officially representing the Commonwealth Archives, and I got the nod for that. So I was sort of half pushed and half drawn into the process. But it was by that stage I became quite interested in the idea. The aspiration was to set up something like what we thought the librarians had, but exclusively for archivists. I don't think we fully realised that model was beginning to fail for the librarians even then. But the idea was that we would represent ourselves professionally, people who worked in archives, and we would mandate postgraduate qualifications, and we would try to exercise some control over who did and who did not work under the designation archivist. Peter Scott in particular was very strong on trying to professionalise the work group in National Archives, Commonwealth Archives offices that then was. And I know to this day he regrets the fact that didn't happen, that the institution went down the other pathway, and people who work in National Archives today are still clerks. There's good reasons for that. It's got to do with salary structures and the organisational framework. To be a small professional clique within the vast Commonwealth Public Service has a lot of disadvantages. But I know the early starry-eyed aspiration was that we would become a professional grouping. Shortly after that model became untenable in all of the marginal professions, and today it's not possible to contemplate the society performing that role in relation to employment. But we've still got the same constitution and structures that we designed in 1975 to fit that model. And one of the great failings, I think, is to update the constitution, the framework of the professional group to adjust to changing circumstances.
Great. You've touched on the next question, which is how do you think it's fared over the years? I guess I'm looking for highlights and lowlights here. What have been your most inspirational moments within the society, and what have been your biggest disappointments?
For me personally, or as an external observer?
Both, however you wish. I think personally it's probably the best.
All right. Well, I've had a roller coaster ride with the ASA. I was very actively involved in its affairs in the early days. I sat on council for a number of years. I participated in its affairs and contributed to its activities. By the 90s, I had started to have a different experience, and this was still retaining some of the early idealism, but I became involved in what was known as the Heine affair, and became very disappointed about the way the society reacted to that. That's a long and involved and embittered story, which probably not worth telling here. But it certainly led me to a feeling of disillusionment about the ASA, which hasn't really left me ever since. So for at least 15 to 20 years, I felt both alienated and disappointed. And that period involved not only what I saw as a failure to live up to our aspirations, but at a personal level there was a lot of bitterness and being snubbed and being criticised. So that was where the alienation came from. In a way that's disappearing now, a new group of people, it's in the past, and there's sort of younger people who don't even know that history. So I'm feeling that I've got a third age of the ASA where I can feel comfortable again, but certainly nothing like the enthusiasm of the early days. But that's probably as much a factor of being old now as it is of anything else.
Okay. My third question is, what are your hopes for the future for this organisation? What would you like it to achieve? I mean, I guess you've hinted with this, with your experience with the Heine affair. Obviously, is there something in that you think?
Well, my experience with Heine was really me not realising that the ASA was not going to be capable of responding to that situation the way I expected. So I wouldn't bring the same expectations to the same kind of affair today. What I think we have to do is to adjust ourselves to the external environment in which we find ourselves. The profession, the jobs for archivists, pure archivists, are disappearing. Archivists, as we heard over and over again in this conference, have to be able to take a skill set, which I hope we will continue to maintain, a set of competencies, as it was called briefly in the 90s, into an environment in which very few of us will be working in jobs that are purely record keeping or archives. We hear the school archivists say they have to be jack of all trades, and in the larger corporations, except the government, most archivists are working in a team approach where they have to work with other data professionals. So hardly anyone is doing an archives job anymore except those working in the government archives, and I'm just wondering how long they can be immune from this process. So we have to adjust ourselves as a professional group to that. When we started, Gerald Fisher, who's now long deceased, ran a different model to the rest of us in the drafting committee. He wanted what he called a records association model. And the BRA, the British Records Association, anyone who was interested in records and record keeping could belong. It wasn't a professional association. We insisted we had to have a professional association with associates. Today, I wouldn't quite go down the Gerald Fisher role, but I would invert what we did in 1975. I would have a much more broad-ranging society, open to anybody who was interested and supportive of our goals, and then I would have a structure within that for the professionals, which they could manage and do those bits of our agenda that relate to people working in the profession. But we would be a subset of the larger group rather than the other way around. Just one thing that the now late Warren Horton said to me many years ago, the reason he wouldn't join the ASA, and he wanted to, he was National Librarian, State Librarian of Victoria, he said, I'm not going to belong to any organisation where I can't elect the president. And that reverse model would change that. We wouldn't any longer be having a council consisting solely of professional members. We would be having a much larger association. That could bring in not just the stakeholders, as they're called, the genealogists, the historians, and all the people who, like us, but it's also leave open the door to the other data professionals, the people that I think we could form alliances with, and they're particularly, I think, to be found in the area. They call themselves data managers or data quality professionals, and they themselves feel a little bit outside the ITC group, but I think they align very well with us, and if we could form alliances with them that didn't require them to submit to our professional requirements, I think that would be a good thing. And it would give us a much larger critical mass.
Great. Wonderful. My last question is, what has being an archivist meant to you personally? I target this question more so for younger people thinking of coming into this profession.
In my day, a lot of us, this was a second or third career. Not in the way that it is today, but a lot of us tried teaching, tried librarianship, and ended up in archives. And the joke was, well, archives is the end of the line. There was nowhere else to go. So, in that sense, I suppose it was my third choice. I looked at teaching, I did librarianship, and I came to archives. I liked it in many ways, so it's given me satisfaction and rewards over the years. And it sounds like a negative comment, but there certainly was never anything else that I really felt like doing. I flirted very briefly with starting a law degree. I worked for a year in a legal section of Social Security. And as I said once, that was the best job I ever had. But the reason it was the best job I ever had was that I didn't care about the work. Whereas when I work in archives, I care very much about the work. So in one sense, being in a situation where you don't care is liberating and as a holiday, but I'm not sure it's good for a lifetime.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
It's okay.